You looked at your watch, you know what time it is.
What time is it?
Time. It's your time,
That's
you
right.
Haitian sensation.
It's all of our time.
We like to call it What to Watch. Vlad's at the table. What you got?
Good morning. Good morning. Here are a few stories we think you'll be talking about today. 3 more states and Washington, D.C. filed lawsuits against Purdue Pharma, the maker of OxyContin. The new lawsuits accuse the pharmaceutical giant of falsely marketing the drug as a safe and effective treatment for chronic pain while downplaying the risk of addiction. The company said it vigorously denies the allegations, calling them, quote, misleading. A victory for South African Olympic runner Caster Semenya off the track. The Swiss Supreme Court ordered the sport's governing body to suspend its testosterone rules that went into effect last month. That means she can go back to competing for the time being without having to take medication to suppress her naturally high testosterone levels. This is a story we've covered. It's talk at the table. She says that she's happy to be able to run free.
Yeah, good.
Toronto Raptors star Kawhi Leonard isn't only battling on the court in the NBA Finals, he's also fighting Nike in the court of law for control of his personal logo. Leonard ended his partnership with Nike last year before signing with New Balance. He says Nike fraudulently obtained the rights to his claw logo and is blocking him from using it. Nike has not responded to our request for comment. Have you guys seen the logo? It's pretty cool. It's like a hand.
What is it?
It's like a hand with his, there it is right there. Yep. He's been using it since before he was drafted, he says. So.
I thought it was interesting. New York Times reported that one team was actually trying to buy the logo from Nike, hoping to use that to lure him to their team.
He says it's his. So we'll see what happens in court. All right, guys. Jay-Z is officially a billionaire.
Woohoo! Yay!
I would have thought it happened already.
I know, I thought so too. So Forbes named him the first hip-hop artist to become a billionaire. As the rapper says, Anthony,
he's not a
businessman.
He's a businessman.
I love that lyric.
I'm so glad he didn't throw to me on that. I would have been lost.
I
love that lyric.
And it's interesting because he's not just a hip-hop artist. He is a businessman. And a businessman. But his stake in Uber alone is worth $70 million.
Yeah, so let's listen to this. The magazine added up all the stakes in his companies, including Jay-Z Cognac, Tidal, the music streaming service, and Rock Nation, which is an entertainment company and a record label. The Grammy Award winner's assets also include his $75 million music catalog, $70 million in art, you guys. Right? And his homes with his wife. Have you heard of her?
Yes, Beyonce.
Have you heard of her, Tony?
So he's a billionaire independent of the marriage. It's not the couple.
Oh, no.
I would have thought.
Him. No.
Solo.
No.
They
She's a billionaire too, I would think so.
Do they file jointly?
Yeah, they file jointly. Clearly not.
So this is a big deal. This also includes he's got a lot of homes. East Hampton, a Bel Air mansion, a Tribeca penthouse.
Swiss Beat says this, which I think is great. He said it's bigger than hip-hop. It's a blueprint for our culture. A guy that looks like us, sounds like us, loves us, made it something that we always felt could be us. And he's a billionaire. He's 49, Mr. Carter, and he's only just starting. I'm so happy and thrilled to hear this news about him.
This is big. Congratulations to the Carters.
All right, Vlad, very, very good to see you. 24-hour streaming service, CBSN. You can catch Vlad there on CBSNews.com. We'll be back.
Thousands of people in London are protesting near President Trump's meeting with Prime Minister Theresa May. It's day 2 of the president's 3-day visit.
This morning, London Mayor Sadiq Khan called Mr. Trump a poster boy for the far-right movement around the world. The president called Khan a stone-cold loser yesterday. Paula Reed is outside 10 Downing Street, where the president and May are meeting. Paula, we expected to hear more from the president's opponents.
That's right, Tony. Even when visiting one of our closest allies, the president still manages to find adversaries, and those protests that you mentioned are happening just a short distance from here at 10 Downing Street, where inside the prime minister and the president are still in a working lunch. But the dull roar from those protests serves as a reminder that even though London's ruling elite is rolling out the red carpet for President Trump, not everyone is happy that he's here. Earlier today, the two leaders attended a business roundtable to highlight the country's economic ties. President Trump continues to express optimism about a trade deal once the UK leaves the European Union. And what's been so interesting to see is that both the Prime Minister and Queen Elizabeth, as we approach the anniversary of D-Day, they've both made it a point to emphasize the importance of international alliances to President Trump. In fact, today, May is gifting the president a framed copy of the Atlantic Charter, the declaration signed by Winston Churchill and former
Sounds like we lost Paula
Yes.
Reed there.
That's called a technical difficulty.
It's a technical difficulty.
We did.
Did you have
If we
something?
get her
We
back,
wanted,
we'll
we
go
wanted
back
to show
her.
you one picture that's just come out of London this morning. The anti-Trump demonstrators may not have stopped the motorcade of the president, but the Downing Street cat, Larry, the Downing Street cat parked himself under the presidential limousine right there, as you can see by the tire.
I don't think you can train a cat, so that seems to be the cat's decision.
Larry has lived at Downing Street since 2011. They're actually, now that Theresa May is about to leave, there are some people who are calling for Larry to be the next Prime Minister of Britain.
Might be a knight, might be a Prime Minister.
Larry's clearly in control there outside Downing Street today.
If he's got a Twitter account, he's going to have a lot of followers today.
He has a Twitter account.
You know what I like
It's
about
at
that
number
story?
10 cat.
You know what I like about that story? That the cat's name is Larry.
Yes, so do I.
All right, enough about Larry. Larry, we love you.
Due back in court this Thursday on his most serious charges yet. He now faces 11 new counts of sexual assault and abuse. The R&B star denies all of the charges. In an exclusive CTM interview back in March, he insisted that he has done nothing wrong.
I didn't do this stuff. This is not me, y'all. I'm fighting for my life. Y'all killing me with this. I gave y'all 30 years of my career.
Robert.
30 years of my career. Y'all trying to kill me.
Nearly 20 years ago, music critic Jem DeRogatis helped break the first story on claims against R. Kelly. In his new book, it's called Soulless, The Case Against R. Kelly. He says he knows of 48 women who were allegedly abused by the singer over 30 years. R. Kelly's attorney told us this, quote, "I have not read his book, nor do I care what he says. We will worry about the court and not Mr. DeRogatis." Jem DeRogatis joins us at the table to discuss. Good morning. Really good to have you here.
Hi, Gail. Thank
I
you.
was fascinated by your book because I'm thinking, I heard about this. But for you, this started around Thanksgiving 2000. You get a fax. You even bought a copy of the fax. You get a fax at your job, and it says what? What do you do with it?
I throw it on the slush pile of hate mail and press releases that I'm going to ignore, because anytime I wrote about hip hop, that's not music, it's noise. Or if I dared criticize the Rolling Stones or a baby boom icon. But there was a tone in that fax. Dear Mr. DeRogatis, I'm writing to you hoping you can help. Robert has a problem. His problem is young girls.
Wow.
I slept on it that holiday weekend, and I went back to, I had a science. I went in the office once a week to get my mail, file expenses, and leave, before the editors could give me more work as pop music critic. And there was a level of specificity, and a young woman named Tiffany Hawkins, who it alleged had filed a lawsuit for having a sexual contact with Kelly at age 15. He picked her up in her choir class at Kenwood Academy. And
20 years later, though, Jim, we are still talking about these kind of allegations.
Yes.
And 20 years later, he has still not gone to jail.
Right.
Why?
Every system in Chicago has failed dozens of young black women, Gail. The courts, the churches, the schools, journalism, the music
Journalism,
industry.
yeah.
It was me and another reporter, Abdin Palish, and a brilliant columnist who's a hero of mine, Mary Mitchell, and that was it.
Yeah.
Until recent months, really, everybody wanted to dismiss these charges because, and I'm only echoing what dozens of young black girls have told me, for 19 years, nobody matters less in our society than young black girls.
You write, Jim, that you say, I put the number of people who knew about or witnessed that damage in the thousands.
In the thousands. From record company publicists and tape operators to Clive Calder, the president of Jive Records, Barry Weiss, Reverend Jesse Jackson, one of his spiritual champions.
They deny that they know. Barry Weiss says, listen, I'm running a record company.
Jive Records was named in lawsuits filed by underage girls. And if you're being sued as a party on a $10 million lawsuit by a 15-year-old girl, You said you heard people for years, they would say, R. Kelly likes them young. It's the worst fact. It sounds like hyperbole when I say this, Gail. But if you go to Chicago on the south and west side and you talk to three black women, two will have stories. Not that they've been, but them or their sister or their aunt or their cousin or their mom has been at Kenwood Academy or the Evergreen Plaza shopping mall or the Rock and Roll McDonald's when Kelly was cruising.
But back to Anthony's point, they say that
Since
he has a problem
1991.
with young girls. They don't call him a pedophile. They just think he has a problem and he needs to get help. Even the women who are with him don't seem to be mad at him. They just think, we just need to help this guy.
The hate that's coming my way, your way, and most troublingly, the way of the young women who've accused him, the social media hatred, it's just a lie. The most common statement I've heard in 19 years of reporting this story is, brother needs help. Brother's got to stop.
Jim, R. Kelly's attorneys say you have agenda. You're not just doing reporting.
Right.
You've drawn a conclusion here. Your response?
I've sat with 48 women who've done the most difficult thing a woman can do, to tear out her soul and talk about their sexual assault to a stranger and put their name on it and go public and then be vilified as a liar, a gold digger, for that. I mean, that is courage. This book is about the girls. This book is not about this man.
He goes to court Thursday. Do you have any reason to think that it's going to be different when he goes to court this Thursday?
I believe the state of Illinois case will be torn apart because it's about 3 victims who are cooperating, 1 who isn't, and I believe the federal indictments are coming within a month. A pattern of 30 years of sex trafficking, obstruction of justice, tax evasion. The FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the IRS is after him. And they have interviewed, Gail, everybody in my book. I mean, they are spread out.
The book is very thorough. I will say that.
Yeah,
It's very thorough.
We do want to reiterate that R. Kelly denies it. Jim
Exactly.
DeRogatis, thank you very much. Soulless is on sale today. A new survey says most Americans believe their biggest financial regret is over their savings. CBS News business analyst Joe Schlesinger is in our Toyota green room with what people from age 20 should do to save enough for retirement. Age 20.
The new CBS This Morning. Weekdays. Only CBS.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you again. I'm Anne-Marie Green.
I'm Vladimir Duterte. Thank you so much for joining us. Any moment now, President Trump and Prime Minister of Britain, Theresa May, are expected to hold a news conference. Here is a live look at 10 Downing Street. There have been people streaming out of 10 Downing Street. There you see Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the president's press secretary, coming out of 10 Downing Street, which we saw earlier. The president's daughter and presidential advisor, Ivanka Trump,
Sarah Huckabee Sanders being greeted with a bunch of boos.
Exactly. There are a lot of people that have come out of 10 Downing Street have been greeted with boos. We just want to let our audience know what we're doing here. This is a very fluid moment. This press conference with the President of the United States and Prime Minister May was supposed to start at about 8:45 a.m. Eastern. It's since been pushed back, so we are going to wait for them to take to that podium. There will be a CBS News special report that we will throw to that'll be anchored by our CBS This Morning correspondents and anchors, and then we'll come back and have continuing coverage on CBSN. So that's the plan. There's going to be a lot of moving parts, a lot of different camera angles. Hang tight, everybody.
So the Prime Minister and President Trump were sort of having tea, I believe, at 10 Downing Street at her official residence. But they started the day off at a meeting with business leaders, both American and British business leaders, a sort of working breakfast, and then moved on to 10 Downing Street. The expectation, hot topics, of course, Brexit, Huawei, amongst other things. But of course, the issue really, part of the issue is, Vlad, she's going to be out of a job come Friday. Right. So she's a lame duck prime minister. Right. I mean, less than a week of work left. Yeah. So I don't know how much can really be hammered out. Trade is also a really big issue as well.
The president has talked about coming together with Britain for a substantial trade deal, although these things, as Ian Lee reported to us earlier this morning, take a lot of time to do. And it's not even clear who the next prime minister is going to be. That will not probably happen until late June, early July. So it'll be interesting to see what the two leaders have to say here. Certainly, we can expect that they will talk about their bond, the bond that exists between the United Kingdom and the United States. That's that special relationship, as coined by Winston Churchill. But there's a lot on the table here, and it's not clear how much can actually be accomplished.
Yeah, you know, you talked about we don't know who the next prime minister is going to be. There are certainly some signs that point to Boris Johnson,
who President Trump likes.
Who President Trump has, who is definitely, in fact, he liked him so much that last time he visited about a year ago, he told a journalist that Boris Johnson would most likely make a very good prime minister. Right. That ruffled a few feathers, because, of course, Theresa May was the prime minister at the time. Right. She remains the prime minister now, outgoing though. And so it was sort of an awkward thing to say, particularly when she was in the midst of her trying to wrangle support for her Brexit deal, and to have the visiting president throw shade, if you will, probably didn't help their relationship. Right. At this point, maybe it's water under the bridge because she's moving on to something else. Yeah.
So you just saw a shot there. That's the podium where we expect the PM and the president to make their way from 10 Downing Street to. And if you were with us earlier at about 9 o'clock, we saw Sarah Huckabee Sanders coming out of 10 Downing Street. It's now 9:02. So it gives you a good sense of how long. There they are. So here we go. We're going to have a special report in 2 seconds.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Gail King with Anthony Mason and Tony DeCopel in New York. President Trump is about to speak to reporters in London along with British Prime Minister Theresa May.
They have just finished meeting on the second day of the president's visit to Britain. We're told the two leaders discussed trade and other issues. The president started his day with a business roundtable following last night's state dinner hosted by Queen Elizabeth at Buckingham Palace.
This morning in central London, thousands of demonstrators are protesting against the president. They are trying to march past the entrance to Downing Street, where the president and May met this morning, so they can rally in Parliament Square. Ben Tracy is in the hall where the news conference is about to start. Ben, what can you tell us?
Well, Tony, we are expecting the president and the prime minister to show up here in this hall any minute now and start this news conference. Members of the president's family and his administration are here. Of course, this news conference is eagerly anticipated because of many of the issues that have likely been discussed here today between the president and the prime minister, namely trade. We heard the president speaking a lot this morning about wanting to work out a big trade deal with the UK. Of course, before that happens, the UK has to first leave the European Union, and that is a process that is ongoing ongoing and not likely to be resolved soon. But the president is trying to lay the groundwork for those talks. This also comes at an awkward time because Prime Minister May officially steps down as the prime minister this coming Friday. She will continue on in an interim capacity, but her ability to really negotiate any sort of trade deal with the U.S. or any other deal seems very limited at this point. We are being told that the president is about to walk in the room shortly. We're getting a sign they're asking me to sit down, so I might sit down and continue talking to you so we don't get on the wrong side of things here in the hall. But this should be starting any minute, and I think you can expect the president will get questions about trade. There'll be questions about Brexit. He has criticized the prime minister's handling of those negotiations, and now I'm being waved down by many people, so I'm going to take a seat, and we'll wait for the president and the prime minister to show up here.
You know, Ben, of course, the part of the reason the prime minister is leaving is because she attempted to get 3 Brexit deals through Parliament, and they all failed. As you said, the President Trump has been somewhat critical of her and has already made some controversy over there by expressing his support for Boris Johnson as a potential successor.
Yes, and there are reports today in British media that the president actually had a 20-minute phone call with Boris Johnson today and that they were trying to arrange a face-to-face meeting. And the reporting here by the British media is that Boris Johnson actually turned down that meeting, claiming that he had a prior commitment. But that is obviously there has been communication between the two. It's something I'm sure myself or somebody else will ask the president about what they actually talked about. But yes, that has been somewhat controversial in terms of the president kind of wading in to British politics, which is not something in the past you have seen many American presidents do.
Also interesting that the president, who has called himself in the past Mr. Brexit, has said that Nigel Farage, the leader of the Brexit party there in the UK, should have been brought in to negotiate where Theresa May failed. Have we heard anything about where Nigel Farage is today?
We have not, and those comments probably did not sit too well with the prime minister. That has been a real thorny issue for her here as she has worked on those negotiations. And I should mention that the First Lady Melania Trump just entered the room and is taking a seat, which means we can expect to see the president here now any minute along with the prime minister. But going back to your question, in terms of some of those comments the president has made, it's unclear if the president and the prime minister have spoken about that, if she's expressed any displeasure to him about weighing in on some of those issues. Certainly, I'm sure someone will be asking whether or not she finds those comments helpful and what she thinks of them. She is in an interesting position now where, she might have a little more freedom to speak. And here comes the president and the prime minister now.
All right, Ben, thank you very much.
You are looking at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. As you can see, the president and the prime minister made the short walk from number 10 Downing Street, where they had a meeting, and the president's family is in the room as well. And here are the president and the prime minister.
This week, we commemorate the extraordinary courage and sacrifice of those who gave their lives for our liberty on D-Day 75 years ago. As leaders prepare to gather here from across the world, it is fitting that we begin with a celebration of the special relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States, enduring partners who stood side by side on that historic day and every day since. For generations, at the heart of the transatlantic alliance has been our shared democratic values, our common interests, and our commitment to justice. It is that unity of purpose that will preserve the deep-rooted ties between our people and underpin our nation's security and prosperity for the next 75 years and beyond. So I am very pleased to welcome the President of the United States of America on this state visit to the United Kingdom. For the past 2.5 years, the President and I have had the duty and privilege of being the latest guardians of this precious and profound friendship between our countries. As with our predecessors, when we have faced threats to the security of our citizens and our allies, we have stood together and acted together. When Russia used a deadly nerve agent on the streets of our country, alongside the UK's expulsions, the President expelled 60 Russian intelligence officers, the largest contribution towards an unprecedented global response. And in Syria, when innocent men, women and children were victims of a barbaric chemical weapons attack, Britain and America, along with France, carried out targeted strikes against the regime. Since we spoke about NATO during my first visit to the White House, we have maintained our support for this crucial alliance. Thanks in part to your clear message on burden sharing, Donald, we have seen members pledge another $100 billion, increasing their contributions to our shared security. And I'm pleased to announce that NATO will soon be able to call on the UK's Queen Elizabeth-class aircraft carriers and F-35 fighter jets to help tackle threats around the world. Today, we've discussed again the new and evolving challenges to our security, our values, and our way of life. We share the same view about their origin and our objectives in meeting them. But, like prime ministers and presidents before us, and no doubt those that will come after, we can also differ sometimes on how to confront the challenges we face. I've always talked openly with you, Donald, when we have taken a different approach, and you've done the same with me. I've always believed that cooperation and compromise are the basis of strong alliances, and nowhere is this more true than in the special relationship. Today, we've discussed again the importance of our two nations working together to address Iran's destabilizing activity in the region and to ensure Tehran cannot acquire a nuclear weapon. Although we differ on the means of achieving that, as I've said before, the UK continues to stand by the nuclear deal. It is clear that we both want to reach the same goal. It is important that Iran meets its obligations, and we do everything to avoid escalation, which is in no one's interest. Recognising our nations as safer and more prosperous when we work together on the biggest challenges of our time, I also set out the UK's approach to tackling climate change and our continued support for the Paris Agreement. And we also spoke about China, recognising its economic significance and that we cannot ignore action that threatens our shared interests or values. As we've deepened our cooperation on security, including our joint military operations and our unparalleled intelligence sharing, so our economies too are ever more tightly bound together. Every morning, 1 million Americans get up and go to work for British companies in America, and 1 million Britons do the same for American companies here. Our trading relationship is worth over £190 billion a year, and we're the largest investors in each other's economies, with mutual investments valued at as much as $1 trillion. Mr. President, you and I agreed the first time we met that we should aim for an ambitious free trade agreement when the UK leaves the EU. And from our positive discussions today, I know that we both remain committed to this. I'm also sure that our economic relationship will only grow broader and deeper, building on the conversations we had and the ideas we heard from UK and US businesses when we met them earlier today. Tomorrow, we will sit down in Portsmouth with our fellow leaders to reaffirm the enduring importance of the Western Alliance and the shared values that underpin it. And as we look to the future, in the years and in the generations ahead, we will continue to work together to preserve the alliance that is the bedrock of our shared prosperity and security, just as it was on the beaches of Normandy 75 years ago. Mr. President.
Well, thank you, Prime Minister May. Melania and I are honored to return to London as our nations commemorate the 75th anniversary of D-Day in World War II. We want to thank Her Majesty the Queen, who I had a lovely dinner with last night, a fantastic person, fantastic woman, for so graciously inviting us to this state visit. It was very, very special. Our thanks as well to Prime Minister and Mr. May for the warm welcome they've given the First Lady and me as we remember the heroes who laid down their lives to rescue civilization itself. On June 6, 1944, tens of thousands of young warriors left these shores by the sea and air to begin the invasion of Normandy and the liberation of Europe and the brutal Nazi occupation. It was a liberation like few people have seen before. Among them were more than 130,000 American and British brothers in arms. Through their valor and sacrifice, they secured our homelands and saved freedom for the world. Tomorrow, Prime Minister May and I will attend a commemoration ceremony in Portsmouth, one of the key embarkation points for the invasion. More than 1.5 million American service members were stationed right here in England in advance of the landings that summer. The bonds of friendship forged here and sealed in blood on those hallowed beaches will endure forever. Our special relationship is grounded in common history, values, customs, culture, language, and laws. Our people believe in freedom and independence as a sacred birthright and cherished inheritance worth defending at any cost. As the Prime Minister and I discussed in our meetings today and yesterday, the United States and the United Kingdom share many goals and priorities around the world. I want to thank the people of the United Kingdom for their service and partnership in our campaign to defeat ISIS. As we announced a few months ago, ISIS's territorial caliphate in Syria and Iraq has been completely obliterated, defeated. The United Kingdom is also a key partner in NATO. The Prime Minister and I agree that our NATO allies must increase their defense spending. We've both been working very hard toward that end, and we are very current, and some of them are not. We can't allow that to happen, but I appreciate everything you've done in that regard. We expect a growing number of nations to meet the minimum 2% of GDP requirement. To address today's challenges, all members of the alliance must fulfill their obligations. They have no choice. They must fulfill their obligation. Among the pressing threats facing our nations is the development and spread of nuclear weapons. Perhaps that's our greatest threat. The United States and the United Kingdom are determined to ensure that Iran never develops nuclear weapons and stops supporting and engaging in terrorism. And I believe that will happen. In protecting our nations, we also know that the border security is national security. Today, the Prime Minister and I discussed our thriving economic relationship. Both countries are doing very well, and participated in a roundtable with industry and business leaders. I can say probably the biggest business leaders anywhere in the world. Our nations have more than $1 trillion invested in each other's economics. The United Kingdom is America's largest foreign investor in our largest European export market. That's a lot of importance. As the UK makes preparations to exit the European Union, the United States is committed to a phenomenal trade deal between the U.S. and the UK. There is tremendous potential in that trade deal. I say probably 2 and even 3 times of what we're doing right now. Tremendous potential. 75 years ago this Thursday, courageous Americans and British patriots set out from this island toward history's most important battle. They stormed forward out of ships and airplanes, risking everything to defend our people and to ensure that the United States and Britain would forever remain sovereign and forever remain free. Following this press conference, Prime Minister May, Mr. May, the First Lady, my family and I will visit the legendary Churchill War Rooms beneath the streets of London. I look forward to that. In his famous speech on this day in June 1940, Prime Minister Churchill urged his countrymen to defend our island, whatever the cost may be. As we mark this solemn anniversary of D-Day, we remember that the defense of our nations does not begin on the battlefield, but within the heart of every patriot. Today, let us renew our pledge, engraved at the American Cemetery in Normandy and inscribed by President Dwight Eisenhower in St. Paul's Cathedral, right here in London, that the cause for which they died shall live. Prime Minister May, it's been a true honor. I have greatly enjoyed working with you. You are a tremendous professional and a person that loves your country dearly. Thank you very much. Really an honor. Thank you for the invitation to memorialize our fallen heroes. and for your partnership in protecting and advancing the extraordinary alliance between the American and the British people. It's the greatest alliance the world has ever known. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we're going to take 2 questions from the UK media and 2 questions from the American media. I'll start with Beth Rigby.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister President Trump. Beth Rigby from Sky News. For you, President Trump, as you hold talks with the current Prime Minister, the leader of Her Majesty's opposition has been addressing a protest rally against your visit in Trafalgar Square. He says he's disappointed you attacked the London mayor, and he criticised your record on refugees. What do you have to say to him? And is this man someone you could do a trade deal with? And to you, Prime Minister, do you think that Sadiq Khan is a stone-cold loser? Thank you.
You're talking about the Mayor of London. Is that who you said? Yes? Well, I think he's been a not very good mayor, from what I understand. He's done a poor job. Crime is up, a lot of problems. And I don't think he should be criticizing a representative of the United States that can do so much good for the United Kingdom. We talked about it before. He should be positive, not negative. He's a negative force, not a positive force. And if you look at what he said, he hurts the people of this great country. And I think he should actually focus on his job. It'd be a lot better if he did that. He could straighten out some of the problems that he has and probably some of the problems that he's caused. Thank you.
Gonna.
Sure, yes. He wanted to meet with me, and I told him no. Yes. Well, I don't know Jeremy Corbyn. Never met him. Never spoke to him. He wanted to meet today or tomorrow, and I decided that I would not do that. I think that he is, from where I come from, somewhat of a negative force. I think that people should look to do things correctly as opposed to criticize. I really don't like critics as much as I like and respect people that get things done. So I've decided not to meet. As far as the protests, I have to tell you, because I commented on it yesterday, we left, the Prime Minister, the Queen, the royal family. There were thousands of people on the streets cheering. And even coming over today, there were thousands of people cheering. And then I heard that there were protests. I said, where are the protests? I don't see any protests. I did see a small protest today when I came, very small. So a lot of it is fake news, I hate to say. But you saw the people waving the American flag, waving your flag. It was tremendous spirit and love. There was great love. It was an alliance. And I didn't see the protesters until just a little while ago, and it was a very, very small group of people put in for political reasons. So it was fake news. Thank you.
And I would say to both the Mayor of London and to Jeremy Corbyn, the discussions that we have had today are about the future of this most important relationship between the US and the UK. As the President described it, the greatest alliance the world has seen. It is this deep, special relationship and partnership between the United States and the United Kingdom that ensures our safety and security, and the safety and security of others around the world too. And it is this relationship that helps to ensure there are jobs that employ people here in the UK and in the United States, that underpins our prosperity and our future. That is a relationship we should cherish. It is a relationship we should build on. It is a relationship we should be proud of. Mr. President, would you like to?
Big, and this really is a very big and important alliance. And I think people should act positively toward it because it means so much for both countries. It means so much, and it's been so good. Steve Holland, yes, go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. Is that on? There. What is your current view on Brexit, sir? Should Britain leave the European Union if there is no agreement by October 31st? And for the Prime Minister, what will be the ramifications for the UK if there is not a deal?
Well, I don't like to take positions in things that I'm not, really. I understand the issue very well. I really predicted what was going to happen. Some of you remember that prediction. It was a strong prediction made at a certain location on a development we were opening the day before it happened. And I thought it was going to happen because of immigration more than anything else, but probably it happens for a lot of reasons. But I would say, yeah, I would think that it will happen, and it probably should happen. This is a great, great country, and it wants its own identity. It wants to have its own borders. It wants to run its own affairs. This is a very, very special place, and I think it deserves a special place. And I thought maybe for that reason, and for others, but that reason it was going to happen. Yeah, I think it will happen. And I believe the Prime Minister's brought it to a very good point where something will take place in the not-too-distant future. I think she's done a very good job. I believe it would be good for the country, yes.
And from my point of view, I believe it is important for us to deliver Brexit. We gave that choice to the British people. Parliament overwhelmingly gave the choice to the British people. We should now deliver on that choice. I continue to believe that actually it's in the best interests of the UK to leave the European Union in an orderly way with a deal. I think we have a good deal. Sadly, the Labour Party and other MPs have so far stopped us from delivering Brexit and that deal. But we will. But obviously, this is an issue that is going to continue here in the UK. I think the important thing is we deliver Brexit, and once we're out of the European Union, we will be able to do what we've been talking about today and develop not just that free trade agreement, but a broader economic partnership into the future.
If I could just follow up on a related matter, Mr. President, are you prepared to impose limits on intelligence sharing with Britain if they do not put in place some restrictions on Huawei?
No, because we're going to have absolutely an agreement on Huawei and everything else. We have an incredible intelligence relationship, and we will be able to work out any differences. I think we're not going to have it. We did discuss it. I see absolutely no limitations. We've never had limitations. This is a truly great ally and partner, and we'll have no problem with that. Okay?
Francis.
Mr. President, Francis Elliott from The Times. Do you agree with your ambassador that the entire economy needs to be on the table in a future trade talk, a trade deal, including the NHS? And Prime Minister, are you tempted to take the Prime Minister President up at his word and stick around for a bit until the trade deal is done?
I think we're going to have a great trade deal, yes. I think we're going to have a great and very comprehensive trade deal. I can't hear him. What?
It's the National Health Service. He says, should the National Health Service be on the table?
Look, I think everything with the trade deal is on the table. When you're dealing in trade, everything's on the table. So NHS or anything else, or a lot more than that. But everything will be on the table, absolutely. Okay.
But the point about making trade deals is, of course, that both sides negotiate and come to an agreement about what should or should not be in that trade deal for the future. And as regards your second question, Francis, nice try, but no. Look, I'm a woman of my word. Mr. President, would you like to?
John, please.
Mr. President, thank you. Mr. President, domestically, in recent days, Mexico has stepped up apprehensions and deportations of Central American migrants.
That's good.
This could possibly be in response to your threat of tariffs. Has Mexico
not possibly be?
Has Mexico done enough to avoid tariffs, which will be imposed in some 6 days from now?
No, we haven't started yet.
But the threat is out there.
Yeah, the threat is out there, but we haven't really started yet. No, this will take effect next week.
And what
5%.
And what do you think of Republicans who say that they may take action to block you imposing those tariffs?
No, I don't think they will do that. I think if they do, it's foolish. There's nothing more important than borders. I've had tremendous Republican support. I have a 94% approval rating as of this morning in the Republican Party. That's an all-time record. Can you believe that? Isn't that something? I love records. But we have a 94% approval rating in the Republican Party. I want to see security at our border. I'm going to see great trade. I'm going to see a lot of things happening, and that is happening. And as you know, Mexico called. They want to meet. They're going to meet on Wednesday. Secretary Pompeo is going to be at the meeting, along with a few others that are very good at this, and we are going to see if we can do something. But I think it's more likely that the tariffs go on, and we'll probably be talking during the time that the tariffs are on and they're going to be paid. And if they don't step up and give us security for our nation, look, Millions of people are flowing through Mexico. That's unacceptable. Millions and millions of people are coming right through Mexico. It's a 2,000-mile journey, and they're coming up to our border. And our Border Patrol, which is incredible, they're apprehending them. But our laws are bad because the Democrats don't want to pass laws that could be passed in 15 minutes, that could be passed quickly. In one day, it could change. But even beyond the laws, Mexico shouldn't allow millions of people to try and enter our country. And they could stop it very quickly. And I think they will. And if they won't, we're going to put tariffs on. And every month, those tariffs go from 5% to 10% to 15% to 20% and then to 25%. And what will happen then is all of those companies that have left our country and gone to Mexico are going to be coming back to us. And that's okay. That's okay. But I think Mexico will step up and do what they should have been done. And I don't want to hear that Mexico is run by the cartels and the drug lords and the coyotes. I don't want to hear about that. A lot of people are saying that. Mexico has something to prove. But I don't want to hear that they're run by the cartels. You understand. You report on it all the time. A lot of people do. That would be a terrible thing. Mexico should step up and stop this onslaught, this invasion into our country, John.
And Prime Minister May, you tried 3 times to get a deal on Brexit. At this point, do you believe that a deal on Brexit is possible, or is this a Gordian knot? President Trump says that you didn't take his advice in terms of negotiation. Should you have? Would that have made a difference? And President Trump, if I could ask a follow-up, you had a conversation with Boris Johnson. Could we ask what you spoke about, and will you meet with Michael Gove today?
Well, first of all, on the first issues, I said in answer to an earlier question, I personally believe that it is in the best interests of the UK to leave the European Union with a deal. I believe there is a good deal on the table. Obviously, it will be for whoever succeeds me as Prime Minister to take this issue forward. What is paramount, I believe, is delivering on Brexit for the British people. And I seem to remember the President suggested that I sued the European Union, which we didn't do. We went into negotiations and we came out with a good deal.
Yeah, that's not such a... I would have sued, but that's okay. I would have sued and settled, maybe, but you never know. She's probably a better negotiator than I am, Jeremy. But you know what? She has got it, in a sense, John. That deal is teed up. I think that deal is really teed up. I think they have to do something, and perhaps you won't be given the credit that you deserve if they do something, but I think you deserve a lot of credit. I really do. I think you deserve a lot of credit. Okay? Yes, John? So I know Boris. I like him. I've liked him for a long time. I think he'd do a very good job. I know Jeremy. I think he'd do a very good job. I don't know Michael. But would he do a good job, Jeremy? Tell me. Okay? Good. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, there you see, President Trump has just finished a news conference in London with British Prime Minister Theresa May. They said this morning their meeting was focused on trade in Iran. The president said that both countries are committed to negotiating what he called a phenomenal trade deal. And when asked about Britain's effort to negotiate its way out of the European Union, the president said this: he thought that Brexit should happen, that it will happen. He also dismissed this morning's big anti-Trump protests in London, saying he had not seen them. We could certainly hear them, but he said he had not seen them.
We did hear them.
Yes.
Yeah. Ben Tracy is in the hall where the news conference just wrapped up. Ben?
I've got nothing. Well, that point about protests, we can tell you we were in front of Buckingham Palace yesterday, and we did not see thousands of people waving and cheering. We did not see that today either. There have been protests in the city. I can say that those protests have been smaller than they were the last time President Trump did come here, and then maybe that's part of what he's alluding to. But I think kind of the substance of this, you heard a lot about trade. You heard the president use the word phenomenal in terms of a trade deal that he wants to strike with the UK once it leaves the EU. You heard Theresa May call it an ambitious trade trade deal. So certainly that is something that both sides are looking forward to. You did hear a lot of talk of the special relationship, which you always do when you have a UK and a US leader together, but you also heard some of the cracks in that relationship that Theresa May alluded to in her opening statement, talking about issues of climate change, that the UK still supports the Paris Climate Agreement. Of course, the US is the only country no longer in that Paris Climate Accord. She did talk about Brexit. She talked a little bit about Iran and China as well. Interesting to hear the president say that he feels like they're going to make a deal on Huawei. And for people out there who don't know what Huawei is, that's a Chinese telecom giant. And there are concerns in American intelligence about giving Huawei access to 5G networks in countries like the UK. And the UK has signaled that it is open to letting Huawei in. The U.S. has kind of obliquely threatened that if it does that, perhaps the U.S. will not be able to share intelligence with the UK in the way that it does today. That would be a significant development if something like that were to happen.
But the president did say he didn't see that happening. He called the U.S.-British alliance the greatest alliance the world has ever known. As we mentioned earlier, the president has expressed his support of Boris Johnson for future prime minister. He actually met with Boris Johnson, but he wouldn't say what he talked about. He was asked if his opinion of Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, and he said that Corbyn wanted to meet with him, and the president said, and I told him no, he's somewhat of a negative force.
Yeah, the president has not been shy about taking shots at some politicians here in London, including the mayor of London. You also heard him talk about him, saying he's a negative force. And then with Jeremy Corbyn. And, you know, the president just a couple of days talked about Jeremy Corbyn, saying if he became prime minister, perhaps the president would have to get to know him better before he could share intelligence with him. That is a significant statement when you're talking about the closest ally of the United States. And Jeremy Corbyn does have a chance of becoming prime minister if that were to happen. Obviously, the relationship between him and President Trump would start out in a very negative place.
All right, Ben Tracy in London. Thank you very much, Ben. Our coverage will continue throughout the day on our 24-hour streaming network, CBSN. You can watch it at cbsnews.com or through our CBS News app.
All right, so there we are hearing from the president and Theresa May, outgoing Prime Minister Theresa May. They had a sort of a closed-door meeting at the official residence, and they touched on a variety of things. Obviously, they talked about trade, they talked about Brexit, and she sort of opened her remarks talking about the nuclear deal with Iran and saying that the UK stands by that deal.
There were a number of things that the Prime Minister listed when she first came out. She was the first one to speak. She listed not only the actions that the Trump administration has taken when it comes to Russia. I think that was a question that we were asking earlier, whether or not that would be addressed. The fact that the Russians have been very active on British soil. Prime Minister May signaling that President Trump took it very, very seriously, expelled a number of Russian individuals. She talked about when those images of children being gassed by Bashar al-Assad came to the president's desk in Syria, what was happening in Syria. The president took decisive action. So she listed a series of positive actions that the United Kingdom and the United States have taken together. And also, let's remember why the president is in Europe. It's to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings, the largest amphibious assault in modern warfare history. She talked about the sacrifice, as did the president of the United States, talking about the great sacrifice that those soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen all undertook 75 years ago on the shores of Normandy, before he took some questions from the press. And that's where it got interesting.
Yeah, you know, one of the questions, of course, he was asked was about Brexit. And for the first time, he sort of indicated that he didn't want to weigh in on a topic. He didn't really finish the sentence, as sometimes the president talks like that. He sort of started to say, well, I don't really want to, you know, and then he kind of trailed off into, I know an awful lot about it. He kind of pivoted a little bit. But of course, we already know, and he sort of reminded everyone that he had predicted the outcome of the Brexit vote.
From one of his golf courses.
Yes, from one of his golf courses, yeah. But we know that he's a big supporter of Brexit. He had been critical of Theresa May just last year when he visited, about her handling of Brexit, and he's a big supporter of Boris Johnson, who, you know, who knows, maybe the next prime minister, who broke with Theresa May's party because he disagreed with the way she was handling Brexit.
There were a couple of other things the president touched upon, including NATO at one point, saying that he believes that NATO should fulfill their obligations to the alliance. He said, quote, they have no choice. They must fulfill their obligations. And then took some questions from the press, and what I thought was interesting about the questions that he received is the first one. All right, so I'm being told we have Paula Reed standing by to break down what we heard here from Prime Minister May and the president. So Paula, just set the scene for what we heard and saw from the Prime Minister and from the President of the United States. There were a number of topics that they discussed, including, I think, the one that's getting a lot of buzz on social media. Maybe we can start with that, and before we move on to the more substantial issues. The President saying that he hadn't seen any protests. He only saw people cheering for him. He called the reports of the protests, which there is plenty of video that we can roll in the other box there, or we can show our viewers the protests that were happening in Trafalgar Square and in London. The president called that fake news.
Yes, he did. It's amazing. Even when the president visits our closest ally, he still manages to find adversaries. He was asked about his ongoing feud with the London mayor, as well as these protests, and he said that he saw the protests, they were very small. Well, it's true that yesterday there weren't many protesters. We only saw a handful, but most of the organized protests were scheduled for today. They were saying they were expecting hundreds of thousands of people, but really it only turned out to be a group of several thousand. Now, you can actually hear them from here at 10 Downing Street while the Prime Minister and the President were enjoying a working lunch, and this dull roar of chants and boos that was coming across. It's an important reminder that while the ruling elite of London is rolling out the red carpet for President Trump, not everyone is happy that it's here. So I can argue over the crowd size for the protests. They are here in substantial numbers, but it was not as extensive as they had some people had said or expected.
We also have correspondent Ben Tracy standing by. Ben, you were sort of in the room where this press conference occurred. You can maybe sort of correct me, because I know you were paying close attention. There were a couple of times where he was asked about Jeremy Corbyn, who is sort of the leader of the opposition, standing on the other side of the president philosophically as it pertains to Brexit. And it almost sounded like he said sort of a couple different things. He said that Jeremy Corbyn wanted to meet with him, but he said not to. He called him a negative force. And then towards the end there, he kind of said he would make a good leader.
Yeah, it wasn't quite clear. I think what he was saying at the end there in terms of make a good leader, he kind of did what the president does sometimes, where he ends a sentence by saying maybe not, maybe so, just to kind of leave the door open. He then pointed at somebody on the British side of the room, who was another politician here, saying, you know, would you make a good leader? I don't really know you. So I think the president was having a little moment there and trying to play with that. It might not have come across on television quite as well. But certainly the president taking the bait when asked these questions about some of these leaders here in the UK who are not particular fans of his. And he really had no qualms about showing that he's not fans of theirs either, and using pretty strong language to describe the mayor of London and also Jeremy Corbyn, who at this point does have a shot at becoming the prime minister.
Ben, you know, there was another curious moment, and maybe you can clarify for us, because sometimes it's hard to get the context when we're here in New York. You're actually there in the room. The president, the very first question that he was asked, it seemed to be about Jeremy Corbyn, and the president responded by talking about Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London.
Yeah, and in fairness to the president, there was no microphone apparently on the other side of the room for the journalists from the UK asking questions, and I think that kind of got lost. She asked a two-part question that had both of their names in it, and the president picked up on Boris Johnson, and then they kind of corrected that when he was talking about Sadiq Khan.
Got it. Okay. Paula, you're there as well, so let's bring you into the discussion while we continue the discussion with Ben. So the couple of things that the president did talk about that will certainly affect us here in the United States. He was asked again about these tariffs that are set to go into place against Mexico in the next 6 days. And the president holding firm to that policy, even though there are reports that the administration was not prepared for this announcement from the president last week.
That's right. He continues to sort of discuss this possibility of tariffs against certain Mexican goods. At the same time, he's also expressing optimism about a new trade deal between the UK and the US. It's all optimism. There is nothing actually concrete in play just yet. But this is just one of the many issues that the president sort of wants to distract from back home, because when he made that announcement about the possibility of tariffs on certain goods coming out of Mexico, the markets responded not favorably. So while he's here, all this royal pomp and ceremony, the great photo ops. This is all part of things that he is trying to distract from back home. The increasing talk of impeachment, the markets reacting to these tariffs. So you saw today, he wasn't fully committal to them. He just said, yep, I don't think Mexico's doing enough. He tries to use that issue to draw attention to what's happening at the border.
Ben, you know, we talked about this a little earlier. The president said that he didn't see any protesters. There are obviously protesters out there. We've seen a lot of video. But as I understand it, too, because of the nature of security, many of these protesters are being kept a distance away from the president. We talked about seeing sort of crowds of supporters as well. What are you seeing?
Well, I mean, you know, yesterday the president basically used Marine One to fly around London, to fly from where he's staying, and they landed the helicopter in the backyard, basically, of Buckingham Palace. So the president didn't get that close to people on the street yesterday. Today he has been using the motorcade more often, so he has probably seen both things that he described. He talked about people waving on the street. I think to say that there are thousands of people lining the street waving American flags and British flags is not something we have seen anywhere here in London since we've been here. We certainly did not see it yesterday outside of the palace, which is where most people would be if they were going to do that sort of thing. And then to call the protests small and fake news and that they're there for political purposes, clearly that's the president's interpretation of those protests. We did see on our way in here on the bus that took us over here to this event, we saw several thousand people in Trafalgar Square with signs that were anti-Trump, but also anti a lot of other things, just kind of against racism, against misogyny, all sorts of things that they kind of latch on to the president for. I did want to go back to one thing you were saying about Mexico, because I think the president's language on that was very strong. And the president might not be aware of this, but right before this news conference began, the foreign minister of Mexico put out a tweet saying that negotiations were going well with counterparts at the White House and that there's an 80-20 chance in favor of making a deal before these tariffs begin. You did not hear an opening like that from the president in what he said. He specifically said, we haven't even started yet, meaning the tariffs, and then spoke about the tariffs taking place next week as if that was a done deal. So it's going to be interesting to see if in the next couple of days they can work out some resolution.
Indeed. Ben Tracy reporting, as well as Paula Reed. We thank you both for your insightful reporting, and we'll speak to you a little later. Thank you. All right, so let's throw to some sound that we have from that press conference between British Prime Minister Theresa May and President Trump. Let's just start off with what he was talking about with the Mexican tariff negotiations that are happening right now. As Ben rightly points out, there's been some positive news coming from the Mexicans. In fact, the markets, I was just looking at the markets, they're doing quite well. The market's up 240 points right now. A sense perhaps that maybe this was not going to go into effect because of the positive vibes coming from the Mexican government. Right. But the president throwing a little bit of cold water on that. Here's what he had to say.
Mexico shouldn't allow millions of people to try and enter our country, and they could stop it very quickly. And I think they will. And if they won't, we're going to put tariffs on. And every month, those tariffs go from 5% to 10% to 15% to 20% and then to 25%.
All right, so that's the president, as Ben points out, being very tough, very strong on the language that he uses with regards to Mexico. So we'll have to see. Still a couple of days to go as the negotiations continue with American and Mexican counterparts on the other side.
But you know what Ben points out is actually something that we kind of have seen before, right? Often, whoever's sort of negotiating or dealing with said international or domestic issue is sort of working away, and the president projects or underlines the most extreme option. You know, he's usually sort of the hardline voice that says, if we can't figure it out, we'll go all the way. We'll take it all the way. Right. Meanwhile, you know, we've seen it with, the Secretary of State sort of working away, negotiating things while the president is saying something different. And often we wonder, are they on the same page? Right. Or is it part of the president's strategy? And maybe that's what we're witnessing now.
Could be. The president says most likely going to happen.
Right. Okay, so the other sort of big issue, and one of the sort of two big topics that the president was speaking with Theresa May about had to do with Brexit and, of course, trade. He is eager to hammer out a trade agreement with the UK. You know, speaking to business leaders earlier today and also Theresa May, I don't know how much progress can really happen with Theresa May because we know by the end of the week she's going to be out of that job. Right. But he talked a little bit about that. Let's take a listen.
As the UK makes preparations to exit the European Union, the United States is committed to a phenomenal trade deal between the U.S. and the UK. There is tremendous potential in that trade deal. I say probably 2 and even 3 times of what we're doing right now. Tremendous potential. I would say, yeah, I would think that it will happen, and it probably should happen. This is a great, great country, and it wants its own identity. It wants to have its own borders. It wants to run its own affairs. This is a very, very special place, and I think it deserves a special place. And I thought maybe for that reason, and for others, but that reason it was going to happen. Yeah, I think it will happen. And I believe the Prime Minister's brought it to a very good point where something will take place in the not-too-distant future.
So the it that he's talking about is Brexit.
Yeah.
And yeah, we know that, part of the reason that Theresa May is stepping down is because though she went through sort of 2 years of sort of hardcore negotiations, what she was not able to do is win over her own party. And forget about the EU. Her own party has been pretty upset with her and the way things have been going. And we know that the president has been somewhat critical of her pathway to Brexit. The clock is ticking on Brexit. They're going to have to, now the UK is in a position where they're going to have to find a new prime minister and hammer out a deal for Brexit, I think, before October.
That's right. That's
busy.
Right. All right. So there is a lot more news that we will cover in the next couple of hours here on CBSN. We are following the latest out of Virginia Beach, trying to understand the motives. It's really murky.
Yeah.
What led this individual to commit the heinous act that he did over the weekend? So we're going to be digging a little into that. There's some new gun legislation that may be also on the horizon. Presidential candidates, they're all on the road.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We were talking about this yesterday when you were in Toronto, that Joe Biden did not appear in California over the weekend with all the other Democrats that did. But he is still, polls suggesting that he's still leading the pack. That's interesting, but people are saying don't count out Elizabeth Warren, don't count out Kamala Harris. So lots to talk about.
There definitely is a lot to talk about.
Tiananmen Square.
Of course,
We
anniversary.
have an anniversary of Tiananmen Square. We have a really fascinating interview coming up with one of the protesters who was there. So you want to stick around for that.
Virginia Governor Ralph Northam is planning to announce that he will recall state lawmakers to consider new gun legislation following Friday's mass shooting in Virginia Beach. So CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is joining us on the phone now. Ed, we're showing some video of where